She asked the girl a simple question. "What is your name?" The girl looked at her with completely empty eyes and said 4 words that would haunt every researcher who later read this diary. She said, "I am no one." That girl was 8 years old. She had been living in a locked stone room since she was 3, and she had a number burned into her wrist. In 1887, a 23-year-old governess walked through the front doors of one of England's grandest country estates. She was told she would be teaching children. What she was never told was that some of those children did not officially exist. They had no birth certificates, no baptismal records, no names, and they had been living behind a locked corridor for longer than anyone could remember. Within 6 months, the governess would attempt to contact the police, the press, and the church. Within 7 months, every letter she sent would be intercepted. Within 8 months, she would be declared insane and committed to Bedlam Royal Hospital, the asylum the world once called Bedlam. She would never leave, but before they silenced her, she did something no one expected. She hid a diary. A diary so detailed, so meticulous, so damning that it documented everything, every name, every room, every child. That diary was found 130 years later, sealed inside a wall she had broken open with her own hands the night before they came for her. And what was written inside shattered everything historians believed about one of England's most respected families. The county of Derbyshire in the autumn of 1887 was a landscape painted in ash and amber. The moors stretched endlessly, broken only by the skeletal fingers of leafless oak trees and the low stone walls that carved the land into parcels no one seemed to own. The sky hung gray and close, as though the earth itself was holding its breath. It was into this silence that a carriage arrived, rattling along a narrow road that no map of the period accurately depicted. Inside, a young woman sat with her hands folded over a leather case. Her name was Eleanor Marsh. She was 23 years old, the daughter of a deceased schoolteacher from Lincolnshire, and she had answered an advertisement in the Times for a governess position at an estate called Ashworth Hall. The salary was unusually generous. The letter of appointment, written on thick cream paper and sealed with black wax, had offered her more in 1 year than her father had earned in 5. She had been told almost nothing about the family. The letter was signed only by a solicitor in London, a man named Crowe, who described the Ashworth family as private, distinguished, and in need of a woman of steady temperament. There had been no interview, no reference check, just the letter, a train ticket, and a second note instructing her to tell no one where she was going. Ashworth Hall revealed itself slowly. First came the iron gates, rusted open and tangled in ivy so thick it seemed to be consuming the metal. Then came the drive, a quarter-mile of gravel overtaken by moss. And then finally the house. It was enormous, a Jacobean manor of dark stone and tall, narrow windows, its roofline crowded with chimneys that no longer smoked. The west wing appeared fully intact, even grand in a fading way. But the east wing, Eleanor noticed immediately, was different. Its windows were bricked up, every single one, not boarded, not shuttered, bricked, as though someone had decided long ago that no light should ever enter or leave that side of the house. She was met at the door by a housekeeper named Mrs. Taxton, a tall woman with a face that seemed incapable of expression. Mrs. Taxton spoke in short, clipped sentences and led Eleanor through a series of dim corridors to a modest bedroom on the second floor of the west wing. The room was clean but cold. A single candle sat on the nightstand. There was no mirror. That evening, Eleanor was introduced to the family. Lord Ashworth was a man in his 60s, gaunt and controlled, with pale eyes that seemed to observe everything without reacting to anything. His wife, Lady Ashworth, was younger, perhaps 40, and sat at the far end of the dining table without once looking up from her plate. There were 2 children, a boy of 10 named Arthur and a girl of 7 named Clara. Both were immaculately dressed, both were silent, and both displayed a stillness that Eleanor found immediately unsettling. Children fidget, children look around. These children did neither. They sat like miniatures of adults, their eyes fixed forward, their hands flat on the table. But no one mentioned the east wing. And when Eleanor asked casually over her first dinner what lay beyond the corridor that ended in a locked iron door on the ground floor, the silence that followed was absolute. Lord Ashworth set down his fork. Mrs. Thaxton, standing in the doorway, did not move. And young Arthur, for the first and only time that evening, looked directly at Eleanor with an expression she would later describe in her diary as not fear, not sadness, but recognition, as if he already knew what she would eventually discover, as if he had been waiting for someone to finally ask. No one answered her question. After dinner, Mrs. Taxton walked Eleanor back to her room and said only this: "The East Wing is not part of your duties. You will not ask about it again." Eleanor nodded politely. But that night, lying in the dark, she heard something that she could not ignore. Somewhere deep in the house beyond the walls, beyond the locked iron door, she heard a child crying. Not Arthur, not Clara. A different child. A child whose voice she did not recognize. A child who, according to every record she would later search, did not exist. And that was only her first night. For the first 3 weeks, Eleanor followed her instructions precisely. She taught Arthur and Clara in a second-floor schoolroom that overlooked the moors. She ate her meals alone in the servants' hall. She walked the grounds in the afternoon, always watched. She was certain of it from an upper window by someone she could never identify. The estate employed fewer servants than a house of its size should have required. A cook, a groundskeeper who never spoke, Mrs. Taxton, and 2 men Eleanor only ever saw from a distance, entering and leaving the East Wing through a side door that was never left unlocked. But no one knew what Eleanor did at night. Each evening, after the house fell silent, she pressed her ear to the walls. She followed the sound of the crying. It was not constant. Some nights, there was nothing. Other nights, she heard what sounded like footsteps, small, shuffling, uneven, moving behind the plaster. On her 9th night, she heard something else. A voice, high and thin, repeating a single phrase, over and over. She could not make out the words, but the rhythm was unmistakable. It was a child reciting something, like a lesson, like something they had been made to memorize. On the 22nd day, Eleanor found the key. She did not find it by accident. She had been quietly, methodically searching the house during the hours between midnight and dawn. She checked behind paintings. She lifted loose floorboards. She ran her fingers along mantelpieces. And on that 22nd night, inside a hollowed-out copy of Pilgrim's Progress in Lord Ashworth's private study, she found a brass key wrapped in a piece of cloth. On the cloth, written in ink that had faded to brown, were 2 words: East Ward. Not East Wing, East Ward. What they found next changed everything Eleanor understood about the world she lived in. She waited until the deepest hour of the night. She moved through the corridors barefoot, carrying no candle, navigating by memory in the faint gray light that seeped through the windows. She reached the iron door. She inserted the key. It turned with a sound so loud in the silence that she was certain the entire house would wake, but no one came. The corridor beyond the door was narrow, windowless, and lined with bare stone. The air was different, here colder, damper, carrying a smell she would later describe as the scent of a place where no fresh air has entered in years. The floor was flagstone, worn smooth. There were no paintings, no furniture, no decoration of any kind, just doors. Small, heavy wooden doors, each fitted with an iron bolt on the outside. Eleanor opened the first door. Inside was a room no larger than a closet. A straw mattress on the floor, a tin cup, a slate board on which someone had written in unsteady chalk rows and rows of the same sentence: I am no one. I have always been no one. I will always be no one. The sentence filled the entire slate. It had been written and erased and written again so many times that the surface of the slate was grooved. The room was empty, but the mattress was still warm. She opened the second door. Same room, same mattress, same slate, different sentence. I belong to the family. I am grateful. I do not remember. The third room held a child, a girl, perhaps 8 years old, sitting upright on the mattress with her eyes open, staring at the wall. She did not react when the door opened. She did not look at Eleanor. She did not speak. Her hair had been cut short, unevenly, close to the scalp. She wore a gray shift with no markings. On her left wrist was a small brand, not a tattoo, not ink, but a burn scar in the shape of a letter and a number, A7. Eleanor knelt beside her and whispered, "What is your name?" The girl turned her head slowly. Her eyes were clear, focused, and completely empty of recognition. She opened her mouth and said, in a voice that carried no emotion whatsoever, "I am no one." Eleanor counted 12 rooms. 9 were occupied. The children ranged in age from approximately 5 to 13. None of them knew their names. None of them could say where they had come from. All of them bore the brand. All of them recited the same phrases when addressed, as though language itself had been reduced in their minds to a set of approved responses. They were not chained. They were not visibly injured. But what had been done to them was, in Eleanor's words, a violence worse than any bruise, a violence against the self, against the soul, against the very idea that a human being has the right to know who they are. The truth was far worse than she had imagined. In a final room at the end of the corridor, larger than the others, furnished with a desk and shelves, Eleanor found the ledger. A large, leather-bound book filled with entries dating back to 1793. Nearly a century of records. Each entry documented a child, their age at acquisition, their origin, workhouses, poorhouses, foundling hospitals, their assigned number, and their progress. Progress, as the ledger defined it, was measured in stages: disruption, erasure, reconstruction, and completion. Children who reached completion were marked with a final note: transferred. Children who did not were marked differently: disposed. The ledger listed over 300 children across 94 years. None had names. All had numbers. And in the margins, in a variety of handwritings spanning generations, were notes from the Ashworth family, observations as clinical and detached as if they were documenting livestock. Eleanor did not sleep that night. She returned to her room, locked the door, and began writing. Her diary, the one that would be found over a century later, was not a personal journal. It was evidence. She copied entries from the ledger from memory. She sketched the layout of the East Wing. She described each child, their approximate age, their brand number, their condition. She wrote with the precision of someone who understood that she might be the only witness, and that her words might be all that survived. Over the following weeks, Eleanor began to smuggle information out of the estate. She wrote letters to the local magistrate, to a journalist at the Manchester Guardian, to the Bishop of Derby, to her former employer in Lincolnshire. She gave them to the groundskeeper to post when he traveled to the village for supplies. But no one knew that the groundskeeper reported directly to Lord Ashworth. Every letter Eleanor sent was intercepted. Everyone. She received no replies because no one ever received her words. And Lord Ashworth, reading her descriptions of the East Wing with what Mrs. Taxton later described as perfect calm, did not immediately act. He waited. He watched. He allowed Eleanor to continue her secret nighttime visits to the East Wing, her growing bond with the children, her increasingly desperate attempts to communicate with the outside world. He watched the way a predator watches prey that believes it is free. Some believe this was part of the method. The Ashworth family had been doing this for nearly a century. They understood control not just of children, but of anyone who came close to the truth. They knew that the most effective way to neutralize a threat was not to confront it immediately, but to let it exhaust itself, to let it build hope, and then to destroy that hope completely. It was Mrs. Taxton who finally delivered the message. One morning in April 1888, 6 months after Eleanor's arrival, Mrs. Taxton entered the schoolroom while Arthur and Clara sat at their desks. She placed a folded piece of paper on Eleanor's table and left without a word. Eleanor opened it. Inside were her own letters, all of them stacked neatly, unposted, each one opened and read. Beneath them was a single note in Lord Ashworth's handwriting. "You have been most thorough, Miss Marsh. We are grateful for your dedication. You will now join the program." Eleanor understood immediately. She was not going to be dismissed. She was not going to be allowed to leave. She was going to be subjected to the same process she had witnessed: the disruption of identity, the erasure of memory, the reconstruction of self. She was going to be made to forget. Not because she had threatened the family, but because the family had been planning this from the beginning. The governess position, she realized, had never been about the children in the schoolroom. It had been about her. She was being tested, observed, evaluated. And now, having demonstrated intelligence, resilience, and moral conviction, she had been deemed suitable. Suitable for transfer, suitable for confretion. Suitable to become someone else entirely, placed into service for someone powerful, somewhere far away, with no memory of who she had ever been. She faced an impossible choice. She could comply, submit to the process, lose herself, become another nameless branded asset in the Ashworth network. Or she could resist and face what the ledger called disposal. There was a third option, but it required something Eleanor had never been: reckless. That night she chose the third option. She went to the East Wing one final time. But she did not go quietly. She went to every door. She opened every bolt. She woke every child. 9 children, ages 5 to 13, standing in a dark corridor, blinking in the candlelight, unable to understand what was happening because the concept of freedom had been erased from their minds. Eleanor knelt before each one and said the same thing. You are someone. You have a name. You are real. Most of them stared at her blankly, but one child, the girl from that first night branded A7, reached out and took Eleanor's hand. And in a voice barely above a whisper, she said something that was not one of the approved phrases. She said, "I remember the rain." It was the first original thought that child had spoken in years. Even today, researchers who have studied the diary describe that single sentence as one of the most devastating lines in any historical document. Eleanor led the children down the corridor toward the side door. She had taken the groundskeeper's key from its hook in the servants' hall. She had a plan: reach the village, reach the church, force a public witness. But the truth was far darker than a simple escape. Lord Ashworth was waiting. He stood at the end of the corridor with Mrs. Taxton, the groundskeeper, and the 2 men Eleanor had only ever seen from a distance. They were not armed. They did not need to be. Lord Ashworth looked at Eleanor and the 9 children standing behind her, and he said, with the same calm that had defined every interaction she had ever had with him, "This is not the first time someone has tried, Miss Marsh. It will not be the last, but the outcome is always the same." What happened next is where the historical record fractures. According to the diary, the final entry, written in handwriting that deteriorated with every line, as though Eleanor was writing while running, or hiding, or shaking with fear, she did not surrender. She barricaded herself and the children in a storage room near the side entrance. She used a lamp, she used oil, and she set fire to the east wing of Ashworth Hall. The fire spread rapidly through the old timber framing behind the stone walls. It consumed the corridor, the small rooms, the slates with their repeated sentences, the desk, the shelves, and the ledger. By the time the flames were visible from the village, the east wing was beyond saving. Local firefighters arrived to find Lord Ashworth standing on the lawn, watching his house burn with an expression witnesses described as not anger, not panic, but consideration, as though he were calculating. Eleanor and the children were not found in the wreckage. No bodies were recovered from the east wing. For a brief, desperate moment, it seemed possible that she had escaped, that she had led the children out through the chaos of the fire and disappeared into the moors. But 3 days later, Eleanor Marsh was collected from a roadside inn 12 miles from Ashworth Hall by 2 men who identified themselves as physicians. She was alone. No children were with her. She was delivered to Bedlam Royal Hospital in London with papers signed by Lord Ashworth and countersigned by a physician named Dr. Harlan Crowe, the same surname as the solicitor who had first hired her. Her admission record described her condition as severe hysteria with persecutory delusions. Her claims about children, secret rooms, and identity erasure were documented as evidence of her insanity. She was never released. She died in Bedlam in 1903 at the age of 39. Her death certificate listed the cause as exhaustion and constitutional decline. No family member claimed her body. No obituary appeared in any newspaper. But Eleanor Marsh had done one final thing before they found her at that inn. She had hidden the diary. She had broken open a section of plaster in her bedroom wall at Ashworth Hall during the chaos of the fire, placed the leather-bound journal inside, and sealed it back with wet mortar from the garden. It was not a perfect hiding place. It was a desperate one, and it worked not for years, not for decades, but for over a century. In 2019, during a renovation of Ashworth Hall, which had passed through several owners and was being converted into a boutique hotel, a construction worker discovered a hollow space behind a crumbling section of wall in a second-floor bedroom of the West Wing. Inside was a leather journal, water-damaged but largely legible, written in a careful Victorian hand. It was Eleanor Marsh's diary. The diary was examined by historians at the University of Sheffield. Its contents have never been fully published. What has been released in a limited academic paper with restricted access describes the entries as consistent with the period in material, language, and cultural reference, and notes that the level of specific, verifiable detail regarding Ashworth Hall's architecture, the Ashworth family's financial records, and the 8080s strongly suggests first-hand observation rather than fabrication. The 9 children were never found. No records of them exist in any archive. The fire destroyed the East Wing and everything in it, including the ledger. Lord Ashworth died in 1901. His estate was sold. His family name appears in no further public records after 1912. Mrs. Daxton, the groundskeeper, and the 2 unidentified men vanished from history entirely. And the brands, the letter and number scars Eleanor described on the children's wrists have never been linked to any known institution, program, or organization. Officially, they remain unexplained. But here is what lingers. What keeps researchers awake? What makes this story not merely historical but urgent? The ledger, according to Eleanor's diary, contained a column she only mentioned once, near the end of her entries, as though she had been too disturbed to address it earlier. The column was labeled Recipient. Each child who reached completion, who had been fully erased and reconstructed, was assigned a recipient. Eleanor copied down only a few of these entries before the ledger was lost to the fire. The recipients were not named. They were coded, but the codes corresponded, according to Eleanor's observations of Lord Ashworth's private correspondence, to households across Britain, France, Austria, and the Ottoman Empire. This was not one family's madness. This was a network, a supply chain, a system designed to produce human beings with no identity, no memory, no legal existence, people who could be placed anywhere, used for anything, and who would never be searched for because, according to every official record in existence, they had never been born. The diary ends with a single line, written in ink that is darker than the rest, pressed into the page with such force that the pen tore through the paper. Eleanor wrote, "They will say I am mad. They will say none of this is real. But I have seen the rooms. I have touched the children. I have read the ledger. And I know as certainly as I know my own name, which is the one thing they could not take from me, that this did not begin with the Ashworths, and it will not end with them." Some historians dismiss the diary as an elaborate fiction. Others point to the verified architectural details, the confirmed existence of the Ashworth family in Derbyshire land records, and the documented pattern of children disappearing from English workhouses in the 80s at rates that were never adequately explained. Records say the East Wing was destroyed, but not everyone agrees on what was lost. And not everyone believes the network Eleanor described was dismantled simply because one wing of one house burned down. Even today, children vanish from institutions across the world at rates that defy explanation. Even today, there are people with no official identity, no records, no proof of existence, living in conditions no government acknowledges. Even today, there are places that do not appear on maps and doors that remain locked. Some believe the Ashworth program never ended. It simply moved. It adapted. It found new houses, new methods, new corridors behind new walls. Or perhaps that is just a story, a dark fantasy from a disturbed mind in a Victorian asylum. But if that is true, if none of it was real, then answer this. Who sealed that diary inside the wall? Why does it match the architecture so precisely? And why, when the construction workers opened that hidden space in 2019, did they find, beneath the diary, a single small object that Eleanor never mentioned in her writings? A tin cup, child-sized, dented, with a number scratched into its base. A7. Maybe Eleanor Marsh was mad. Maybe she invented everything. Or maybe she was the only person brave enough to write down what powerful people needed the world to forget. And maybe the reason her story still unsettles us is not because it sounds impossible, but because it sounds exactly like something that could still be happening right now. Behind walls we have never thought to look behind. In rooms we were never meant to find. The East Wing of Ashworth Hall was rebuilt in 2020. It is now a luxury hotel. Guests describe it as charming, peaceful, beautifully restored. But there is one room on the ground floor at the far end of a narrow corridor that the hotel has never opened to guests. The management says it is a storage area. The door is locked, and if you press your ear against it late at night when the rest of the house is silent, well, that depends on what you are willing to believe. Some truths are not lost. They are not forgotten. They are not erased. They are simply waiting behind walls, inside diaries, beneath the floorboards of houses that should have been torn down long ago for someone brave enough or foolish enough to go looking. And maybe that is the most terrifying part of all. Not that this happened, but that we are still not sure it stopped. Or maybe it was never stopped, just moved behind newer walls.